Hello, everybody, and welcome to tonight's edition of Law at the Library, which is a partnership between the Evanston Public Library, the Chicago Public Library, and the Chicago Bar Association. My name is Lorena Neal. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the legal literacy librarian at the Evanston Public Library. We're delighted to have everyone here tonight to discuss this evening's topic, how to find a lawyer when you can't afford one. Our presenter tonight will be Tara Gross of Attuned Legal, which focuses on helping people find creative ways to resolve Illinois microbusiness, property, and rental legal concerns. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the format for this evening, and then we'll get things started. I'll introduce our speaker, who will then give the presentation, which will be followed by a question and answer session. So if you have any questions for our speaker, please type them into the Q&A window, which you'll find near the bottom of your screen. You can also use the chat feature to ask your questions, and I will be collecting all the questions as they come up, and I'll give them our presenter the opportunity to answer them at the end. So feel free to add your questions whenever you happen to think of them. If you have any technical issues or questions, feel free to direct those to me in the chat as well. Our next Law at the Library session will be on the topic changes in tax law, and that'll be on Tuesday, November 29th. You can see a list of upcoming topics and registration links on both the Evanston Public Library and Chicago Public Library websites, and I'll post a link to that in the chat once we get underway here. You can also see videos of previous topics on the Evanston Public Library YouTube page, and I'll post a link to that in our chat also in case you're interested. As I said, our speaker tonight is Tara Gross of Attuned Legal. Tara uses she and they pronouns interchangeably, and she's an attorney and mediator. Their law firm, Attuned Legal LLC, focuses on helping self-represented litigants in property and microbusiness matters through set fee consultations and behind-the-scenes drafting. Tara also answers the Eviction Help Illinois Landlord Hotline, where she helps small landlords navigate tenant issues. So welcome, Tara, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here. And I just want to be sure that my slides are moving correctly here. So hopefully we're about to move to the next slide. There we go. Just briefly, I know you already highlighted this, but the Law at the Library series is really awesome. There are a ton of cool presentations coming up, so I encourage all of you to check them out and let other people know about them. All right, so the goals for today. I'd like to talk about how to find free civil legal resources that are available in Cook County, understand what pro bono legal aid really means, find out some tips for getting the most out of legal aid, and also learn about a few alternatives if legal aid is not an option for you on this particular matter. A little bit more information about me. So I'm a mediator and attorney, and I also do answer the Eviction Help Illinois hotline, which is a hotline for people with rental legal issues outside of Cook County. Cook County has its own hotline, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit. So the first thing to understand is that unlike in a criminal case, most people do not have a right to a lawyer in civil court. There are over 40 legal aid programs in Chicagoland. There are new ones all the time, but each one tends to serve a specific population or work on a particular type of case and have certain resources, certain funding available to it. So finding the right fit is very important because there isn't the same kind of matching program, if you want to think about it that way, that you might have in a criminal case. You know, you might get matched with the public defender. In a civil case, that's not going to happen for you automatically most of the time. So finding the right fit is going to depend on your specific legal issue, the qualification criteria for the particular organization. Some of them are going to ask all different kinds of questions about you, your income level, your background. Maybe you qualify for special services because of a particular status that you hold. Others are going to be more focused on availability, whether or not they have attorneys available. Sometimes they might have volunteers who have expressed an interest in taking a particular type of case. These are all behind the scenes things that you're really not going to know about when you call. So I would really encourage you, if you take away one thing from this presentation, contact multiple organizations early on. Find out whether or not they can help you. Go ahead and do their intake processes. Figure out what your options are, because it can really take a long time to find the right fit if you're going to be able to find free legal help, even though there's this tremendous patchwork of resources out there. And I know that this process can be extremely frustrating to navigate. So what I would really encourage you to do is, as you go through this, keep track of who you've contacted and when, and if you're supposed to do any follow-ups, and just treat the process of finding a legal aid attorney for your issue like it's its own project. So some places to start. Illinois Legal Aid Online is fantastic. This is sort of the main resource that many of the programs are going to direct you to while they're waiting to match you, if they're able to match you. There's good information, articles, quizzes to help you find how to fill out forms correctly, finding the right match for what you're looking for. There is some information in Spanish and Polish. And the best part about Illinois Legal Aid Online, I think, is that you can use this website as a way to figure out in legal terms what your issue is really about. So for example, some issues are going to be really easy to categorize, right? You might know that you have a problem with an apartment that you're renting. So you might know that your issue is a landlord-tenant issue. But there might be other issues that would also be considered civil legal issues, where you're kind of trying to figure out, as you look at legal aid organizations, can they help me? Is this something they do? Maybe they have a very general description on their website. Sometimes by looking through Illinois Legal Aid Online and maybe doing their Get Legal Help feature and clicking through until you figure out what you're looking for, you can actually really narrow the field and understand better in lawyer jargon what it is that you're actually trying to find. The next resource that is just very useful, especially if you have something time sensitive, is Carpals. Kind of a funny name, but this is a really well-established hotline service. They have live operators. So you can call and get some information and referrals. This is a little bit of a different experience than using the Legal Aid Online website, because there are situations where people call Carpals and maybe somebody else involved in the situation has already called Carpals, and they may not be able to help in quite the same way. So they may be able to help with referrals, but it's important to keep in mind that when you are taking this step where you might actually be talking to an attorney for specific information and possibly advice about your situation, that's sort of the point where you may get into issues about whether somebody else involved has already been trying to talk with that particular service. So Carpals, very useful most of the time, but it is always possible that the other person involved may have already called. There's also a pretty good list of legal aid organizations from the Circuit Court of Cook County. This is an older list. Some of them have changed their names since then. Everybody rebrands every so often, but this list will give you some starting points as far as places that you might want to contact besides using the Get Legal Help feature on Legal Aid Online or calling Carpals. Some other useful options in Cook County. Cook County Legal Aid for Housing and Debt is the program similar to Eviction Help Illinois, except it's for Cook County specifically. This program can help direct you towards resources, particularly if you're dealing with an eviction related situation or a consumer debt issue. The Illinois Justice Corps Court Information Helpline provides information about going to court. So if your question's really specific about how do I do this thing? You know, how do I get to my courtroom? How do I file this? What is the procedure for this? They can help you with that. They do not provide legal advice, but sometimes they're able to fill in some of the gaps that you might get if you're getting information piecemeal from different places. The Center for Conflict Resolution is focused on mediation. They have a tremendous free mediation program. So one of the things that you might want to consider as you're looking to resolve a legal issue is whether this is something that the parties could simply talk through with the help of a mediator and reach an agreement on without needing to involve the court, or maybe even as an alternative to having the judge decide the case. The Center for Conflict Resolution's website has information about what they offer and also a way to contact them and see if you can refer yourself in for mediation services. Illinois Free Legal Answers Online is another large-scale resource. This is basically an advice site. It's staffed by volunteer attorneys. And what happens is if you qualify to post questions on here, there is an income requirement, then you can post the details that you need to. Volunteer attorneys will look through the questions and try to do their best to answer them. It's really good if it's not a time sensitive issue, because you may be able to get some in-depth conversation going with an attorney or get some good pointers that are about your specific situation. I would not suggest relying on this if you have an upcoming deadline, because there is no behind the scenes matching procedure that makes it so that anybody will necessarily get to your question before the deadline. They are flagged, but it's very much a volunteer effort on behalf of the attorneys who are participating in that site. There's also the possibility that depending on your issue, you may want to contact your local elected officials or call 311. This is a really good idea in particular if you're dealing with building issues, if you are dealing with conflicts that are around housing. And the reason that I would encourage you to do this is partly because you may be tapped into some resources, but also because if you don't let your local elected officials know what's going on, they may not know what's going on. So particularly if you're dealing with a stressful situation where, you know, there's a landlord issue that keeps happening, or there's a concern about something going on in your neighborhood, these are the kinds of things where, yes, it may help you with getting resources, but it also may help other people as well if you alert your local elected officials. Sometimes people go online and ask on social media. I see this a lot here in Evanston, just looking for help with civil legal issues, posting saying, hey, this happened to me. Does anyone know how I can solve this? There are some risks involved with this. One of the biggest risks is other people involved may find the post. Either they might see it themselves, or people sometimes take screenshots and will text or email them to other people. Many civil legal issues are very fact specific. So the answers that you get that are based on other people's experiences may not be very useful. They might give you ideas that were great in that person's situation, but might not apply at all in your situation. Attorneys are unlikely to be able to give you legal advice without having some ethical safeguards in place. And without getting too technical here, there's a really big difference between legal information and legal advice. So legal information is sort of what we're doing here, where it's basically, here is some big picture information, general information about the law. Here are some ways that it might apply. Here are some ways you might do this, but it's not dialed into your particular situation. Legal advice is going to be based on listening to what you have to say about the situation, finding out the specific facts, looking into these really specific granular details of the situation, and then saying, you know, based on what you've told me, I think the law might give you this relief, or it might apply in this way. it's really confusing when people post online because the question can be sort of a general, the hope might be, point me towards information, say on Illinois landlord tenant laws, but the question might be phrased as, here's 5 paragraphs about what's going on in this relationship. And at that point, it can be very hard to draw that distinction between legal information and advice. So you will not always get the same range of responses from attorneys, even if they're reading your posts and feeling sympathetic. Discussing the problem online does sometimes, for some people, turn into a distraction from the often more annoying process of seeking help through legal aid agencies. And venting about people, even though it's understandable, it can also lead to additional legal problems. The other thing I would just encourage you to remember is that a lot of civil legal matters are resolved through settlement agreements. Sometimes these come about through working with a mediator. Sometimes these are the parties' lawyers talk it out and the parties reach an agreement and it's drawn up. Sometimes the parties themselves just figure it out, which is awesome. And a lot of settlement agreements include terms that restrict the people involved from talking openly about the dispute. So another thing you might run into if you're just out there casting a wide net looking for ideas about how to address a situation is you may have people that you're hoping are going to chime in and they're not really going to tell you very much because they may have signed something that says they're not allowed to. Another online matter that I think is important to keep in mind as you search, there are so many forms and samples online. Attorneys actually search online too for ideas. You know, there's many times that I need to file something in court and I am thinking, well, I kind of wonder what other people have filed that looks like this. And I too will go to Google and see what I can find. The problem is the quality of what you might find is going to vary a lot and the situation that it's for varies a lot. And many times the law has changed since whatever it is that you've located. So it is important if you're doing your own research, check all of your sources really carefully before you rely on what you find. So for example, if you find a form and it says, this is an agreement pursuant to this statute, go and double check the statute, make sure that the statute hasn't changed, make sure that what's in that agreement matches what's in the statute. The resources are out there and you can access them for free, but you do need to be careful with them. In landlord tenant law in particular, this is something I see frequently where people have pulled leases or move out agreements or roommate agreements from whatever internet site they found them on. And there may be some things in there that are not going to really hold up in court or that are not advantageous for the person who's trying to use them. And those are things that are avoidable. But again, I would just caution you about this. I'm guessing some of you have gone online and tried to do your own legal research and know exactly what I'm talking about, that you can get pages and pages and pages of these results, and they're very tempting, but be careful. With that said, there are a few very safe places to look. So the Illinois Supreme Court has been doing this wonderful project. They are issuing standardized forms that are required to be accepted in all of the different circuit courts in Illinois. These forms have been subjected to a lot of review and people actually use them and they do get improved over time. So that's a great place to look on the Illinois Supreme Court website. Look in the standardized forms section. Some of the pages, you have to scroll down a little bit. There may be some paragraphs about things before you get to a drop down that has the forms themselves. And the way the forms themselves are organized can be a little bit confusing at first, but if you poke around on their website for a while, you may be able to find what you're looking for. The Cook County Circuit Clerk's Office has a bunch of standardized forms for Cook County purposes. The circuit clerk's website was not always up and functioning in the way that it is right now. It is actually running pretty smoothly now. The search is running pretty smoothly now. So you may be able to find what you need there. When you look at their website, make sure you pay attention to the category of form that you're looking at, because some of the same forms exist in different versions for different kinds of cases. So make sure it kind of groups with whatever type of case you're handling. And then there is a relatively new program called Illinois Court Help. This is an Illinois Supreme Court effort as well. And the goal is basically to help with finding forms and procedures and all of that. So these are good resources to look at. They don't always look as fancy as the other kinds of forms and samples that you might find out there. That's okay. What matters is that what you're using when you're trying to get something done, that it complies with the law. It doesn't have to look pretty, does not have to have a bunch of jargon or legalese or sound imposing. It needs to comply with the law. So as long as you're sticking to the sort of very mainstream forms that are supposed to be accepted, if one of those applies for your situation, that's great. Now that we've gone over the basics of what you might find as you start searching for resources, want to make sure that you understand the different kinds of payment arrangements that might be involved, because this really does trip a lot of people up. So pro bono legal help, pro bono. This means it's actually free. You are not paying the lawyer or the organization at all for their legal services. You may still have to pay other costs though. So you might have to pay filing fees. You might have to pay a probate bond. You might have to pay certain service fees. Just depends on the situation. These kinds of services typically are going to be provided by an organization that has some kind of grant funding or some other kind of funding source. And they might be provided by staff of the organization or by volunteers. A lot of these organizations, which include the really big nonprofits that you might see in the Chicago legal aid space, are going to be using a mixture of attorneys and non-attorneys to get the job done. The free services are usually, but not always, restricted based on income level. You may have to provide a lot of financial personal info for the organization to decide if you're eligible. And it's really important, whatever the intake procedures are, that you cooperate with them. It does not mean that you're going to be accepted as a client if you cooperate, but many of these organizations have kind of hooks in their grant funding that make it so they have to be able to say, yes, we asked about this. So it is really important to pay attention if they're saying, you know, you need to call us back and go over these questions. That is really important. Qualifying for your free or reduced court costs can be separate from getting legal aid. There's a form that legal aid attorneys might file with the court that allows them to work on getting those court costs reduced or waived. You can also typically do this yourself if you qualify. So on that Illinois Supreme Court Standardized Forms website, there is an application for fee waiver form. Again, this is something that you have to fill out. You have to disclose some amount of personal info. And just as an aside, on that form, and some of you, again, may already be really familiar with this process, but the form has certain categories that if you've received certain kinds of benefits, you don't have to fill out everything on there. You still may get it handed back to you by a court clerk saying you need to fill out this additional page and resubmit it for the judge or their clerk to review. This is just part of the process. It's one of those things that does happen. So just be prepared that you may be having to disclose a fair amount of personal information to get those court costs reduced or waived. Pro bono is totally separate from paid services. So services that you are expected to pay for, legal services that you are expected to pay for, are not pro bono. Attorneys have to decide at the beginning of a case whether or not we're taking it as a pro bono case or not. It doesn't really qualify as pro bono if we did the work thinking that you're going to pay us and then at the end you don't, and we have to write that off as a business loss. That does not make it pro bono. Pro bono means we agreed at the beginning to provide these legal services for free. So it's totally fine to ask upfront when you're talking with a legal provider, whether or not this is a legal aid organization or somebody trying to connect you with services, or you've been given a list of attorneys to call and been told these people might help you. You can and possibly should ask upfront at the beginning, is this free? Is this free help? What do you charge? The paid services might range from advice to full representation, just like pro bono services. But there may also be different kinds of payment arrangements you hear about. So a few of these to keep in mind: a flat fee arrangement. The attorney is providing a certain service for a set price. So this is when, you know, the cost of 6 months of your divorce representation is set at a particular price, and it includes these particular things, and it's not going to be done by the hour. It's going to be done by the 6-month period. Everything that is listed is included. With flat fee services, you need to be really careful that you know what is and what isn't included, because that might end up being an issue for you if your case takes a different direction, or maybe you decide that you need something else, or maybe you're in a really litigious situation and stuff just keeps happening. Those are all the kinds of things that you should be talking about upfront with an attorney if you're looking at hiring a flat fee attorney. A billable hour arrangement. The attorney is going to charge based on how much time it takes for the attorney to complete tasks. Tenths of an hour is the standard. Sometimes you can find somebody who will do a quarter of an hour. Sometimes people will even still do larger than that, but typically it's going to be these 6-minute increments. And what that means is usually, again, you have to have had this conversation, but usually that means an email, a phone call, anything that the attorney has to do. You know, opposing counsel writes them and they need to write back. They need to do research. They have to file something. Anything that they have to do, they're going to check the amount of time for that. If it's up to 6 minutes, that's 1/10 of an hour. If it's, you know, between 6 and 12 minutes, that's 2/10 of an hour, and so on. This is the billing model that you might associate with attorneys on TV shows. This is something that was really popular. It got really popular in the 70s and 80s, and it's something that is often associated with larger law firms. The key is you probably will not know what the cost is until after the work has been done for you. So in the billable model, you'll want to make sure that you understand what that cost is, what kinds of things count, what things don't count, if anything doesn't count, and that make sure that you have kind of a realistic idea of the scope of what's going on. In a contingency case, the attorney is going to be paid a certain percentage of a settlement or award. So a lot of times where you would see this is like a personal injury case. Sometimes you see this in a landlord-tenant case if the landlord has done something spectacularly illegal. It just depends on the situation. The key is that in a contingency case, the attorney is basically, their interests are aligned with yours and that they're working for that award, but they are probably not getting paid by you along the way. And there's also never any guarantee of what the result will be. And then there's also hybrid arrangements. So there's a lot of different possibilities here. What's important is that you don't get confused. So if what you're hearing about doesn't sound quite like a traditional arrangement that you would expect, like a billable hour arrangement, for example, but it still seems to have some money involved, absolutely nail that down. Be very clear about it. There is no shame at all in asking attorneys upfront. You know, we're professional service providers. We are used to these questions. So absolutely ask up front, you know, do you take pro bono cases? What am I expected to pay for? What are you charging me? How are you charging me? How does this typically work? And make sure that you're really clear on all of that, because what you want is to be sure that you're finding the situation that works for you. And you also want to be sure that you understand as you go down the path of seeking legal help, which portions of it you're expected to pay for, keeping in mind that even with legal aid organizations, even with pro bono cases, you may still be paying some amount for process servers or filing fees or probate bonds or other kinds of things that may come up, deed recording, for example. So now that we've covered the landscape, how do you get the most out of working with legal aid attorneys? So legal aid staff and volunteers are here to help and stay very busy. There is tremendous need for volunteers in this area. There is tremendous unmet need. There are always more people looking for assistance than can be served at any given time. So typically the way this works, it'll start with completing an intake, which might be with a non-attorney. They may not be able to tell you anything about your case at this stage or give you any pointers. But what that intake will look like depends on the organization. You should reach out as soon as you think you have a legal issue. So there's, again, no shame, no harm in calling around. You know, you see a conflict coming and you want to be sure that you know, and maybe someplace will give you advice before a suit is filed, for example. Always worth calling around and checking. Ask before you would stop by, though, because a lot of organizations don't take walk-ins, and especially since the pandemic, a lot of organizations don't really have the same kind of open office hours that maybe they used to. So it's a good idea to call first and see, you know, is this a phone intake? Are they going to call you back? How does their process work? Because they may not be able to help you if you show up at their door. You want to be able to provide as much information as possible during the intake. So common intake questions are going to be your contact information, the names and contact information of anybody else involved so that the organization can do a conflict check. If there's a court case, probably are going to ask you about the case number, the names of the parties, any upcoming deadlines, those kinds of questions. If there are documents that go with your case, so for example, if you have a dispute about some property that you left somewhere, then if there was a contract for that property, you may want to have that on hand so that you can provide that if you're asked for it. It's very important to let the organization know right away if your contact information changes. Again, this happens all the time. People move. Sometimes people don't have phone service for a while. Sometimes you might be checking your email at the library and not really have a chance to check it more than a couple days a week. Most of these organizations are going to be able to handle all of that, but the key is that you have to communicate it because otherwise nobody knows. And with the tremendous amount of demand out there, what will happen is typically the organization is going to try to reach you, and if they're not successful, they may be moving forward with other cases because there's so many people contacting them. So just do your best to keep your contact information current at all times. Remember that your intake person and your attorney are not likely actually to be the same. So the intake people are often law students who are volunteering. Sometimes they're community members volunteering. Sometimes they are administrative assistants. Sometimes they're people with special training, particularly if it's a trauma-informed kind of issue. The person who's asking those intake questions is probably putting that information into the organization's system, whatever they have. And then when the case, if you're assigned to an attorney, the attorney will get whatever information was written down, but may still need to go through some of the same questions with you. This can be really upsetting. And again, I just want to highlight this. This is a very real experience for people that you may contact an organization, do an intake where you're basically talking about something that's very personal and very stressful for you. And then you get assigned an attorney who's going to say, so tell me what happened, and end up having to basically disclose again. That is unfortunately very much part of the process because with legal aid, you're typically looking at intake in terms of, can the organization serve this type of case? Is there a conflict that prevents the organization from helping you specifically? You know, is there funding for this issue to be addressed? And then when the attorney jumps in, the questions are related to how can we help you? It's also a good idea to ask your attorney about communication preferences and timelines for responses. Everybody is different. And one of the biggest causes of confusion that I personally see as a regular volunteer on legal aid cases is that sometimes for you as a client, what may be happening is kind of all at once. You know, your issue is just blowing up and all these things are going on, but for your attorney, they may be in court on another case, something else might be going on. It's good to have a plan in place in advance so that you know, okay, my attorney accepts emails, or my attorney prefers phone calls. Or if you have very strong preferences, maybe you don't email, maybe you are phone only, maybe you have a particular communication system that you prefer. Go ahead and have that conversation. Again, there's no shame or harm in having the conversation, but it's kind of like with the money conversation. You really got to get this stuff out there because it will improve the working relationship a lot. And then also, again, it's a good idea to understand what are the qualification criteria and contact multiple organizations if appropriate. It's a lot of work. It's worth it. So a few alternatives then. Self-representation, also called being pro se. The most important thing to keep in mind here is that judges and court staff and court clerks are not allowed to provide legal advice. So it can be, again, one of these situations where the line between legal information and legal advice is kind of messy. And a lot of times, if you are representing yourself in court, what you're going to find is that you are trying to figure out something that seems like it should be procedural, something that seems like it should be simple, you know, okay, the other side didn't show up, so what do I do now? And because that may cross into how do I advocate for myself or my cause in this situation, it may be something that nobody can help you with there. So you may find yourself needing to reach out to some of the resources that we talked about earlier, whether or not that's Legal Aid Online or a helpline, to answer questions again and again throughout the life of your case. The Justice Entrepreneurs Project, which is a legal incubator through the Chicago Bar Foundation. This is actually a program that my firm grew up through. Is devoted to doing these alternative fee arrangements, using technology for innovation, trying to keep costs reasonable, and also supporting firms that have sort of unusual niche practices. So if you're curious about what's out there, you can visit their website. You can also call for referrals. It is important to know, though, that when you contact firms through this project, you're going to be looking at paid representation. It may not be billable hour representation. It may not be particularly traditional representation, but it's still going to probably be paid representation. And then if you're looking just for a more traditional kind of legal arrangement, you can also check with the lawyer referral service at the Chicago Bar Association. This connects people to lawyers who charge fees for services. Some of the fees may be contingency based, so personal injury, consumer fraud are a couple big areas for that. Again, this is a service that you would contact and they would attempt to help you find a paid attorney. While you are seeking assistance, always stay on top of your matter. Again, frustrating. But this is so critical for protecting your position, for protecting your rights. The fact that you are looking for an attorney or trying to work with a legal aid organization, it's something that you may have to explain to a judge, you may have to explain to the other side in your case. But until you've actually signed something that says, yes, this attorney has agreed to represent me in this way, you are really still on the hook for handling whatever you need to handle in your case. So this could be deadlines, this could be court dates. Make sure that you're planning to attend court. Make sure that you're staying organized, make sure that you're prepared in advance. And with Zoom hearings now, it's both easier and harder. It's easier in that you may or may not actually have to go to the courtroom in person. Sometimes a judge is going to require you to show up in person. You shouldn't just assume that it's going to be a Zoom hearing. But if it is a Zoom hearing, the great part is you might be able to do that from anywhere that complies with the judge's orders. Judges often have their own orders. Sometimes they're posted online, sometimes they aren't, that tell you how to act in their courtrooms. And some of the judges in Cook County have gotten really specific about what you're allowed to do and not do on Zoom. So maybe you're allowed to do a Zoom, but you're not allowed to blur the background, for example. One of the standing orders says that. Another might be that you're allowed to do a Zoom, but you can't do it from a moving vehicle. Just depends. So Zoom is helpful, but you do need to do a little research and make sure that you're following whatever quirks apply to the courtroom that you might be in. If you are trying to find basic information about how to use Zoom, or you're trying to find your case's Zoom information, the meeting ID and password, a couple of links here. The Illinois Supreme Court has a pretty useful page with tips on how to use Zoom. And the Cook County Circuit Court maintains an up-to-date list of all of the courtrooms. Sometimes, again, you have to click around on this page. There's a bunch of little headers in the table to get the different types of cases to come up, but you can typically find your courtroom or your judge. The downside to Zoom is that Zoom hearings can go really long, and that on Zoom, there isn't usually the same way to check in and let a courtroom clerk know that you're there. So maybe if you've been in court before the pandemic, you might know what it's like to need to tell the courtroom clerk, hey, I have to step outside for this and then I'll come right back in, but I'm here. You might not be able to do that on Zoom. You might be sitting there for a couple of hours waiting for your case to be called and still need to be on for that. So again, until you have found legal aid, just make sure that you're setting aside the time that you need for your case. So those are the main topics that I was hoping to cover today. I think we're going to have some time for questions, but first I just wanted to thank you for staying with me through this presentation. And I hope that this information is somewhat useful. I know it's a lot. And again, I can't emphasize enough that this process, navigating this patchwork, it is asking a lot of you, especially when you're already in a situation that you're looking for legal advice. But hopefully this will help you decipher it a little bit.
Thank you so much, Tara. We do have a few questions. I'm going to start with Greg's question, which is, will these slides be available to the participants?
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah. Greg, I have a copy of these slides. I will send it to everyone who is registered through Evanston Public Library. I know Chicago Public Library also has someone who has access to them, so I'll make sure that they're going to be emailed out to anyone who registered through Chicago Public Library. I'm going to really quickly type my email address in the chat so that you can see it. If you don't get it or you have any questions about receiving it, you can always email me and I'll make sure you get a copy of that. On to some of the other questions. Can you download a will form and fill it out and have two people witness your signature? Are wills something that you can find forms for basically on your own?
Yes, so you can download forms and you can have people go through the steps that are necessary, but as far as understanding whether or not that fits your particular situation, that's something that you might even want to look for a clinic for. A lot of legal aid organizations and also law schools will do will clinics where they'll basically have some trained volunteers who are able to help you make sure that what it is that you're coming up with actually works for your situation and that you're complying with all of the legal requirements for it to be valid. So there is some good information, I believe, on Illinois Legal Aid online about that, if that's something that you're interested in.
Yes, and I just wanted to add here again for Evanston Public Library, patrons. We do subscribe to a service in addition to the ones that are available through Illinois Legal Aid Online. We subscribe to a service called Gale Forms, which, as Tara mentioned, is it's free legal forms tailored for various situations. You can't 100% rely that they're going to be applicable to your situation, but you do not have to pay for them a lot. There's a lot of places online that say legal forms for this, that, or the other, and you fill out all this stuff, and then at the end it's like, give us $20 to actually access this form. So that will not happen there. These are at least free forms that you can download. If you have an Evanston Public Library card, you can get that at the link that I'm putting in the chat here through our website. You can get there, and if you're not an Evanston Public Library card holder, you can always come into the library. They're free to use from one of the computers that's inside the library, either of our branches. So just wanted to throw that out there.
I would actually also add to that. That's a great option. And one of the things that's really good to keep in mind, especially if you're thinking about something like a will, is that some of the decisions that you have to make and think through, you can always try to come up with what works for you and then try to see if you can either stop by one of these legal aid clinics, or sometimes you can get an attorney to do just a limited scope consultation where they review what you've already done and just make sure that you've got it right. So there are ways to break apart getting things done where you've kind of done the heavy lifting yourself already.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. Another question, are legal fees tax deductible?
That is a great question. So that is outside the scope of my expertise. But I would definitely encourage you to keep track of your legal fees. And if you have an accountant or anybody that you're working with, as far as your own particular tax situation, make sure that you bring it up.
Great, thank you. Someone else asked, what in the case of child support? I'm not sure if exactly what that question refers to. If the person who asked it wants to clarify a little bit, are you looking for organizations that help with child support issues, or if legal fees count against child support? And Tara, if you have any thoughts on either of those sides of it, feel free to jump in.
Oh, sure. So with child support can be a somewhat complicated issue. It is also a really common issue. So depending on a couple of different factors, it is a civil legal issue, but who handles that and who's able to help you with that is going to vary a lot depending on your situation. That is definitely a good one for Illinois Legal Aid Online. And also, some situations do become more complicated to the point that paid attorneys are involved, but definitely research as far as your own particular situation. I wish that I could be more helpful about that.
We do have a question, do the libraries have walk-in clinics? The answer from Evanston Public Library's perspective is occasionally. They are scheduled. We do try and work with attorneys who are willing to volunteer for these sorts of things. We don't have it as a regular feature, unfortunately. We do have at Evanston Public Library the same link for the legal forms that I put there in the chat. You'll see also has other legal resources, including we do legal information consultation appointments, which is very important, the distinction between the legal information and legal advice, which is where we do kind of go over with you what some of the options are in terms of local legal aid organizations that may be able to help you with your particular issues and help you navigate Illinois Legal Aid Online. We do have a list that I just posted here of local free and low cost legal resources that we maintain on our website. So feel free to take a look at that as well. Someone asked if you, oh, go ahead, Tara.
It can also be a good idea. So I definitely would encourage everyone to take advantage of something like this Evanston Public Library resource, because a lot of times if you speak with somebody who's kind of in this network of organizations, they may be able to help direct you towards legal aid organizations that you wouldn't have even thought to call or that aren't on the main referral networks. There are actually a bunch of different listservs behind the scenes that legal aid attorneys are on. So sometimes we will see questions like, you know, I am trying to find somebody who can help these people. And does your organization do this or that? So there are ways of trying to get connected. It's just that the patchwork does not have a single entrance point that will necessarily connect you to everything.
Right. Someone else asked, if you were pro se and made mistakes, can you and a new attorney correct the situation?
That is such a good question. So it really depends on the mistakes. Officially, if you are self-represented, you are being held to the same standards in court as attorneys. And the standards, some of them are really relaxed and liberal. You know, there's certain kinds of things that the state of the law is the court's supposed to look at this and try to do the best they can with it. There are other things that are really strict, especially around deadlines, especially around being ready for trial, and especially around the appeals process. So some rules are hard and fast rules, some rules are wiggly rules, and then some rules I'm not always sure that they're rules at all, honestly. So it just depends on the situation. If you think that you have made mistakes that you're trying to correct or looking to correct, and you want to work with an attorney to do that, it's important to do that as soon as possible, because some of these things have very time sensitive periods where it might be possible to fix it if it's fixed soon enough, but it might not be. The other thing to keep in mind is something that I sometimes see in my practice is there's actually situations where maybe, you know, maybe things have been going sideways in a case for a while, but when you choose to represent yourself, maybe you have an opportunity to try to revisit something and work it out. It just depends on the particular situation. And it is really, really important always to pay close attention to the deadlines because they're not always movable.
Great, thank you. We have a couple, I don't know if you can see the Q&A, Tara, if you could help that, but we have a couple of specific situations that people have typed in. I didn't know if you wanted to take a look at those and address them either directly, or maybe if you had some suggestions for who they should contact.
Sure. So the first one, so we have a Q&A question here regarding a car accident. And the situation with the car accident, my suggestion would be to start by calling carpools and see if this is something that they would be able to help with or provide referrals for. Car accident situations can get a little bit complicated. The other possibility is to see if you're able to talk to a private attorney who's able to do a paid consultation in this area that just focuses on looking at what's known so far. But that is definitely one that's a lot of it's going to be fact specific, because in a car accident, there's questions about insurance, there's questions about the people involved, the police report, if there is one, all those details that went into it. The next question involves a issue with a roofing contractor. So this would be an issue that involves possibly some contract questions, depending on what the contractor was originally hired to do and what kinds of restrictions were around that. And it also may involve some property damage. It may also involve insurance, depending on what was happening. So in this situation, again, you could try calling carpools first just to see if they're able to provide some suggestions or referrals. But typically this type of case does end up with a private attorney, usually in a situation that might be either a flat fee arrangement to work out a demand letter or something like that, or to try to untangle the issue with insurance.
Mm-hmm. Would you think that the Illinois Attorney General Consumer Fraud Complaint Service might be helpful in this kind of situation, or no?
It can be. The thing that's I think is important to understand about the Attorney General's Consumer Fraud Division is that they can't really do anything unless you talk to them. So they're one of those places that whether or not they are going to, in their independent judgment, decide to do something just depends on your situation. It may also depend a little bit on whether or not the service you're calling about already has a file that's a mile high. You never know when you call, right? So
Mhm.
it's certainly worth reaching out to them just to see what they have to say and if it's something they can help with.
Sure. And I just put the link in the chat there for the website to file a consumer complaint with the Illinois Attorney General in case that's helpful to that particular person.
And I think that's also a really great point, is that as you navigate this type of issue, you might find yourself having to contact, 5 or 6 different types of places. So you might want to talk to the Attorney General's office. You might want to talk to carpools. You might want to talk to your insurance company if one's involved, all of these different places. And it's important to keep track of who you've been talking to and the communications that you've had with them, because sometimes there will be a point in the legal aid process where all of this crystallizes and it all kind of just comes together, and it can really help you to have good documentation along the way as you go on that journey.
Yes. We do have another question about whether attorney and filing fees, court costs, are collectible if you prevail and win in a court case.
That depends on the type of case. And in a lot of situations, they are not. In some situations, they are, but it is never a good idea to go into a lawsuit assuming that your fees and costs are going to get paid by the other side. Sometimes it will be possible, especially if there's a statute that specifically provides for that. But in many situations, it's not going to happen at all.
Okay, thank you. And then we have one person who wants to know what you specialize in. If you can give us a kind of a quick rundown of your work.
Sure. So my focus is actually, I do consultations and drafting for self-represented litigants. I work on microbusiness and property issues. I am really passionate about landlord-tenant issues. I do work both sides of those cases. And most of what I like to do is to try to help people find solutions for whatever kinds of awkward conflicts that they're having that don't require going into court, although I do represent people in court sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Great. Then we have a final question we can take here. We're winding down. Is time your friend or foe? And could you say why?
I absolutely love this question. So I think the answer is yes. Yes, it is. So basically, I think that in a lot of situations, legal situations, you really do need to jump on things as quickly as possible. You have to start working the process as quickly as possible. And it can really be a very drawn out process. It is very rare unless you are lucky enough to be in a situation where you can get people to agree that they should resolve the issue promptly outside of court. A lot of times it's going to take a long time. But I also do find that over time, a lot of conflicts, people start to move on in their lives. They start to realize that whatever it is they felt so strongly about maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, it starts to seem silly in retrospect. Or sometimes they have other influences in their life that are saying, you're still fighting about that. So can definitely work out better over time.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Tara, for being here tonight and sharing all of this with us. As I said, you do have my email here in the chat. You can contact the Evanston Public Library if you have any questions about this. This presentation will be put onto our YouTube channel within the next couple of days, and I will send out that link along with the slides from this presentation to everyone who has registered here tonight so that you can access them whenever you like. So thank you everyone for attending, and thank you so much, Tara, again, for sharing all of this with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for hosting me.
Absolutely. Have a great night, everybody.